Good morning. My name is Esther Manheimer. I'm Mayor of the City of Asheville. I'd like to welcome you to the February 6th, 2025 Agenda Briefing Work Session. All council members and staff are participating virtually. The meeting will be live streamed on the city's YouTube channel or through the city's virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the front page of the city's website. You may also listen to the meeting via phone at 855-925-2801. Meeting code 11060. And as with all agenda briefing meetings, we will not take public comment. Council and staff, please unmute yourselves and say a quick hello when I call your name. Vice Mayor Antoinette Mosley.
Good morning.
Council Member Kim Roney.
Good morning.
Council Member Maggie Ullman.
Hey, everybody.
Councilmember Bo Hess.
Hello, good morning.
Councilmember Shanika Smith.
Good morning.
Councilmember Sage Turner.
Good morning.
City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Ben Woody.
Good morning.
City Attorney Brad Branham.
Good morning, everyone.
City Clerk Maggie Burleson.
Good morning.
All right, thanks everyone. I'm now going to turn it over to our City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Thanks, Mayor. And again, good morning. Welcome staff, council, and others joining us online or the YouTube channel to our council agenda briefing meeting to prepare for council's business meeting on February the 11th. The meeting, as usual, will start at 5 p.m. and will be held in the chamber of City Hall. We've got a pretty dense agenda, particularly the items under the other issues and concerns. So we'll first start out with an overview and discussion of the items scheduled for action or discussion at your business meeting on February the 11th. Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood will cover those items. Ben Woody has gone on hiatus for a little bit. We don't have any council committee agenda items to review since we haven't restarted those meetings. Rachel will also briefly review both the 8-week agenda and the scheduled meetings related to Helene recovery efforts. And as I said, lastly, we will likely spend the majority of our time on the items under the other issues and update section of the agenda. On that agenda, first, staff from FEMA will provide an update on FEMA's individual assistance program and progress made there. The second item will be an update from city's community development manager and staff with Haggerty Consulting Group on the CDBG DR process and next steps to receive the direct allocation of funds from HUD. I'll now turn it over to Rachel for review of the business agenda.
Thank you, Deborah, and good morning again, Mayor and City Council. As Deborah mentioned, because we do have such a dense agenda today, I'm just going to highlight a few consent items, but as always the case, if I don't cover an item or you have questions, please just let me know. We can certainly provide additional details on any items that I skip over. The first item under consent for Tuesday's business agenda that I'm going to highlight is item B. This item is requesting authorization for a $2.5 million contract with Hydromax USA to help support the Water Resources Department's valve condition assessment program. The valve condition assessment project has been underway by staff for quite some time and is directly aligned with recommendations that came out of the Water Independent Review Committee to improve the data we have on our valve locations. The intent of this contract is to provide augmented support for staff to not just locate and document all large transmission main valves in our water system, but also to clean valve boxes where necessary and document unique attributes of those assets, such as recording the number of turns necessary to close or open each specific valve. So just wanted to let you know that work is aligned with the body of work that IRC recommended and that staff already has a lot of this work underway. This is just supplemental resources to assist with that project. Moving on to item E. Item E has two parts, both of which are associated with our Code Purple Winter Shelter Program. As a quick reminder, the Continuum of Care is responsible for leading Code Purple planning efforts. E1 is associated with the city and county's longstanding cost share agreement for Code Purple. Each year through an interlocal agreement, the city administers Buncombe County's cost share. And although Code Purple has been active since November 2024 for the current season, due to delays associated with the storm, we did not receive the interlocal agreement until just a few weeks ago. So this interlocal agreement is for the city to administer the county's $50,000 share to support Code Purple this season. Item E2 is associated with council action that you took actually the week of the storm on September 24th, approving the reallocation of ARPA funds formerly dedicated to the Ramada Permanent Supportive Housing Project to support homeless services. A portion of the former Ramada funding was dedicated to Code Purple, and so this season, ABCCM is the primary Code Purple provider. The COC has recommended that $222,000 in city ARPA funds be used to more fully support the operational costs associated with providing Code Purple shelter capacity. The requested council action on Tuesday would authorize the city manager to enter into an agreement with ABCCM for them to utilize that $222,000 in ARPA funds to support the current Code Purple season. And then item F, which I have to say is my favorite capital project because of where I live in the community. But item F is requesting authorization to enter into the construction, engineering, and inspection services contract with Trans Systems for the new Haw Creek sidewalk project. And I'm highlighting this because A, I live in Haw Creek and it's my favorite capital project, but also just want to make sure you see in the request that there are some dates provided, seasons, if you will. So construction is scheduled to begin this spring with an 18-month construction timeline. And so we hope by summer of 2026, I will be able to go for a morning run down New Haw Creek Road and utilize the sidewalk. Yes, Councilmember Roney.
Yeah, I just didn't want you to be alone in expressing enthusiasm. The neighborhood has advocated for this for a long time. It's a necessary infrastructure improvement, and I think it's a great cause for celebration.
Absolutely it is. Thank you for highlighting that. And then moving down to item J. Item J is related to the board composition for the Housing Authority, and I'm actually going to turn it over to the mayor to cover this item.
Sorry, just got to unmute myself. So sorry for all the back and forth, but at our last council meeting, we actually increased the board size from, if I recall, 7 to 11, and now we're just trimming it back to 9 in this consent agenda item. So the maximum size it can be is 11, but this would just move it back to 9 seats. I will say the vice mayor and I have been working pretty hard on trying to sort of reassemble the board, if you will, and did a big outreach to encourage people to apply. We interviewed many very qualified people for the board seats, and I have, since these appointments are made singularly by the mayor, I've appointed several of those folks. There does continue to be some turmoil, for lack of a better term, in the administrative leadership at the Housing Authority, so we're hoping to get an effective board in place that can help right that ship. I think that's how I put that.
Great, thank you, Mayor. So that concludes the consent agenda. I'll now briefly go into presentations and reports. The first presentation we have scheduled is on the I-26 connector project. You'll be receiving an update on the project from Nathan Moneyham with the North Carolina Department of Transportation. I assume most of you are aware, but the contract with Archer Wright has been signed, so the optimization and review period has ended. So Nathan's presentation on Tuesday is going to focus in on the project scope and the next steps with the design build project now that Archer Wright is under contract. Moving into the city manager's report, we do have a few employee recognitions that are scheduled. And then following those employee recognitions, Clay Mitchell with our planning and urban design team is going to provide an overview of the newly created floodplain assistance support team that was established just a few weeks ago to provide focused and personalized support for property and business owners, as well as developers needing timely and clear information about what can be built or developed in the floodplain. So Clay's going to provide an overview of what the team does. It is a cross-departmental team. And then he also has some really impressive stats on the impact that that team has had in the few weeks that they've been formed. Moving to public hearings, I am actually going to turn it over to Chris Collins and Steph Dahl with our planning and urban design team to walk you through the 3 public hearings that we have scheduled.
Hey, thanks, Rachel. Good morning, everybody. I'm Chris Collins, Planning and Urban Design Department, and Steph and I are here together to go over the UDO amendments for the promotion of housing on transit supportive corridors and mixed-use zoning centers or districts. And if you recall from previous presentations, this was pre-storm referred to a lot as batch 1 of the UDO amendments for housing. This has been going on for a little while because we had the storm interlude, but was described in the recent update at the January 28th City Council meeting as a part of the manager's report. So these amendments, next slide, please. The key takeaways for these amendments is that these amendments would impact commercial property only by increasing development thresholds. That is the threshold it takes to have to remove at the City Council, reducing minimum parking requirements, and removing some building size and density limitations in certain districts, again, all along transit supported corridors and in mixed-use zoning districts. We do know that the city needs additional housing that's attainable and affordable, as evidenced by low vacancy rates, high rents, and many other things the council's been privy to. These amendments would definitely reduce regulatory barriers for housing and provide incentives for development of affordable housing units. These amendments are supported by the goals and strategies of both the comprehensive plan and the affordable housing plan. And that was the most recent affordable housing plan in September of 2024. And again, as I said, these do represent the first batch of regulatory changes aimed at promoting housing and do not propose any changes within the city's residential zoning districts. Next slide, please. So quickly, an overview of where we are in this process, a refresher on that overall UDO update approach. Right now, again, looking at corridors and centers that would impact non-residential zoning districts along transit supportive corridors and mixed-use zoning centers. That was by design when this was originally rolled out to minimize impact on neighborhoods while work was ongoing on updates within neighborhoods and anti-displacement measures that are both programmatic and zoning in nature. That would lead us, when this work gets completed, to what's been, I've just gone ahead and called it a neighborhood overlay because that's how we've been talking about it. And that's probably one of the tools there to enable more housing options and remove barriers to housing development within certain neighborhoods, but focusing that on specific areas that are indicated as less vulnerable and more housing ready in the middle housing study and affordable housing plan, among other documents. That would lead us to further UDO refinements, which can be a lot of things. So I won't say a lot about that yet, but probably more detailed requirements that may be barriers to housing, such as site-specific standards like buffering and parking lot requirements. Next slide, please. So what amendments are a part of this batch? First of all, that would be an adjustment to our development review level thresholds. Right now, as you're all familiar, anything over 49 residential units is a level 3. Therefore, it's a conditional zoning and requires a hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council to approve that conditional zoning. So y'all are seeing most of our major housing developments, and that does set them through roughly 120 to 180 day process just to get that zoning entitlement before they can even start working on engineering and construction documents. So the proposal here would be to increase the size allowed for attached residential developments to be approved by right. And then beyond that, allow larger developments that are providing a public benefit of affordable housing to be approved by right based on affordability tiers. And I'll show you that info in just one sec. And additionally, going down beyond the level 3 requirements, there are some site compliance triggers. You may have heard people talk about level 1 site plans before. These are smaller developments like let's say a new Walgreens or something like that, that get reviewed at the staff level. Right now, that also incorporates provisions for people having to redo entire sites for vacancy and things like that. We're reworking that in order to benefit those commercial corridors as well and make it easier for small businesses to get into those spaces. Next slide, please. So talking about the proposed thresholds within this amendment and the affordability benefit that we're offering within this. First of all, the first row on this table in front of you shows a project with 0% affordable units. We would change that baseline threshold from 50 residential units to 100,000 square feet gross floor area for a single-use residential project, and to 150,000 square feet gross floor area for a mixed-use residential project that incorporates a minimum number of residential units. So that would mean anything up to 100,000 square feet would be able to go through as a level 2 project. It still has to meet all the code requirements, still is required to hold neighborhood and community meetings, go through the TRC. It just would not require city council approval. Then you can see as we drop down this chart, we're offering an incentive for affordable housing that would allow people to go further with larger developments, starting at 5%, 80% AMI, or 2%, 60% AMI, running all the way up to what we call tier 4, which would take a project dedicating 20% of the units at 80% AMI or 10% of the units at 60% AMI. That would allow a development to go all the way up to really 299,999 square feet as a level 2 project, as an incentive to provide that affordability as a single use project, and then again further as a mixed use. As a note, our code currently allows higher provisions for mixed use projects, so we're following that trend. Next slide, please. The next two amendments that are part of this batch are focused on first minimum parking requirements, and this would eliminate minimum required number of parking spaces for automobiles along these corridors and mixed use zoning districts. This is coming forward as best planning practice, and we've seen it implemented all across the country and even in the state of North Carolina lately within cities such as Raleigh and Durham. Neither Raleigh nor Durham track the metrics on this, but we have combed their site plans and found that the vast majority of projects are still providing parking, just doing it at a rate that they feel appropriate for development. And there's also associated with this an increase in the number of required bicycle parking spaces to promote multimodal transportation options. We also have to change how we calculate required bicycle parking spaces. So while we were in there, we thought this number could be made robust as well. The third set of amendments within this batch are zoning district specific standards. There are a few districts that have around the city that have requirements that limit the maximum size of building that can be placed on a lot, while also having a density limitation. And those two things are a little bit redundant for controlling building size. So what this amendment seeks to do is allow a larger building size when residential is proposed. Right now, it's just the building size across the board. Now we would say, oh, you're doing residential, you can do whatever your residential square footage is, can go on top of that building size. Does not propose any changes to building height limitations, so the massing of the building does not get a boost out of that, but the envelope of the building does as well. And it does remove density caps as a controlling factor because we'd be moving to a building size control, and quite simply trying to keep it broad right now. Density caps setting a maximum number of units per acre actually have the side effect of mandating larger units, which may not be as affordable or attainable than using building size. The next slide. Talking about where this is applicable, I've already mentioned that this is along transit supportive corridors and mixed use zoning districts. The devil is in the details, so to speak, though. Each amendment has slightly different districts where it applies. On the left in blue, you'll see where those development review thresholds apply. In the middle in red, where those minimum parking changes would apply. And on the right in purple, where those district standard changes would apply. And why the difference? Really, with thresholds, we went in after Tropical Storm Helene, took a look at all of our amendments, obviously, And the thresholds, we did remove the river zoning district and the Rad River and open space districts, which are primarily composed of special flood hazard areas. We thought it was good to not really give the development incentive there yet, while we're still understanding all the impacts. For parking, we did leave the parking reduction in those areas because a parking reduction means a reduction in mandated impervious surface and pavement. And that is a good thing in flood areas. And for district standards, there were only certain districts within those corridors that had standards that needed to be modified. So while I really wanted to show one map of where everything was applicable, it kind of fell out this way. We do have an interactive map that can be scrolled around. We'll make sure it's available to everybody, let you look at this in more detail, but that's the high level. Next slide, please. Let's talk about communications and engagement so far. This has been a long effort, as stated. It started internally really early last year, pre-storm. And there's some things I want to highlight from our engagement efforts. First of all, with this effort, we rolled out a new UDO text change engagement hub, which is part of our public engagement portal. And we'll have an entry for every text amendment that comes to you for folks to be able to comment on and interact with. We've gotten some good success with engagement. I think we're up around 40 plus interactions on the amendments right now. So we're glad for that. We've held in-person and virtual information sessions. Okay attendance in person, great attendance virtual. This often happens. We've held some direct outreach to legacy neighborhoods and presented directly to the Legacy Neighborhoods Coalition. And this engagement spanned way back before pre-healing and now refreshing. The outreach that was done as a part of the missing middle housing study and affordable housing plan definitely informed where we went with this. And we've held targeted focus groups and surveys, mainly with housing developers, as we wanted to make sure these elements would move the needle for them. And we have also held a planning and zoning commission public hearing. Next slide, please. And as far as what we've heard, and this is trying to summarize a lot of input and engagement, we have heard a lot of support for the changes, and people expressed that they think they will enable more housing development. We have a comment that said, hey, this couldn't come soon enough. We've heard concern for not applying the certain changes more broadly, citywide. We've heard concern regarding the effectiveness of the incentives for affordable housing alone, zoning alone, right? Is that incentive enough? Well, it may or may not be, but as you know from other presentations, there are other elements to promoting affordable housing that are part of the implementation of the affordable housing grant. They're not zoning related. So hopefully those would relieve this concern. There's been some recognition that bicycle parking requirements alone don't help the bicycling problems in Asheville. Staff, we agree, but making sure parking is there, that's helpful. It's part of the equation. There was a strong preference shown to eliminate parking requirements citywide, not just in the corridors. And I only really mentioned that one because you'll see it's part of Planning and Zoning Commission's motions. They're recommending citywide, just in these districts. And lastly, we have, or not least important, but lastly on the list, we have heard a better concern. The promotion of housing in commercial areas, such as these corridors, may increase development pressures in legacy residential neighborhoods. Okay, next slide. And again, those are the takeaways. And that was a real condensed presentation on this. So if y'all have any questions, I'm here. So. Yes, Councilwoman.
Can we go back to the concerns expressed by the legacy neighborhoods? I was able to watch the public comment section from yesterday's planning and zoning. And I've also spoken to the representative of FEMA. And one of the concerns expressed was kind of related back to we were doing the urban place consideration. And they seem to be upset that this is just being brought to them within a week of a final vote. They were under the impression after the urban place that they would be brought in as things were being considered initially. And they were concerned that no analysis had been done on the possible effects of these changes on their neighborhoods. You have anything to say about that?
I will say, and we definitely heard that at the Legacy Neighborhoods Coalition and at Planning and Zoning Commission public comment last night, like you mentioned. This has been a long wraparound process, like I said, starting early last year. And a lot of it began with some Planning and Zoning Commission initiated amendments that staff was working with them on. That started through that process because they had been initiated by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Held work sessions. There was a greater concerted effort around the time when we were leading up to the first work session with council to outline this entire plan of attack on how to work on affordable housing. And for us, if you remember the slide where we talked about batch 1 and batch 2 of this amendment, those were part of the same effort at that time. So we had ramped up trying to get an engagement effort going. And I know Steph is here with me. She could talk a little bit about the contacts we made at that time. But this approach was to minimize impacts on neighborhoods by sticking with corridors. Since we've heard that, we've looked at options. What if we tried to move these out of corridors? And we found that we removed over 60% of the properties that would be affected by this citywide. So that's where we've been so far. But I don't know, Steph, if you have anything you want to add to that on the engagement from back in the beginning.
Question before Steph steps in.
Yeah.
I feel like, I don't know, 6 months ago, I was having a conversation with Ben and Rachel, and we were talking about corridors, and I asked a question about could certain areas be excluded on the corridors? Have we considered excluding portions of the corridors that abut these legacy neighborhoods?
Yeah, and that's one thing we have looked at, and that's what I was trying to get to there, was that we did look at that, and that would remove a little over 60% of the land area from this amendment. If we did try to do that, because of the nature of this, we're changing base zoning districts to get into to make these changes. So we looked at that. That information is there for you. It would remove about 61% of the land area from this impact.
Councilwoman, if you don't mind, I'd like to underscore a couple items for your question about did staff speak with legacy neighborhoods before last week? The answer is resoundingly yes. So we had many, Chris alluded to it, but we had some good processes with folks from all of those neighborhoods last summer. And to reiterate, we did, yes, of course, analyze the impact that this would have on legacy neighborhoods. As part of the input we heard from you all, and also from the input that we heard from legacy neighborhoods, as Chris described, we narrowed the scope of this, the applicability of this, to just the corridors, right? And we want to make sure that folks also know that we read their plans. And if you look at, for instance, some of the neighborhood plans, like Shiloh's neighborhood plans, this is very much in alignment with what their neighborhood plan says. It does say to keep commercial development from intruding into the neighborhood, but it also recognizes that housing and affordable housing is needed, and that it's needed on the corridors. It even talks about providing affordability incentives and for allowing for greater density in these areas. So for those reasons, staff is not going to be recommending that we exclude any of the corridors that are currently on this proposal from the text and map amendments.
So again, just so I'm clear, 60% of the changes would affect legacy neighborhoods?
Or you're saying that, Steph, that was a little bit confusing what you said. This is confined to the urban corridors, not in the neighborhoods. This is like the advanced auto parts on Hendersonville Road next to Shiloh.
That's correct. And to Councilwoman Mosley's question, what Chris was saying is that if we try to eliminate certain zoning typologies that happen to be adjacent to nearby areas from legacy neighborhoods, then we would be, that this would be greatly diminished. So this originally started as a citywide initiative to promote additional affordability and housing production. It has been narrowed so that it only applies to corridors. If we now take out those last bits, this is not going to be an effective text and map amendment change to produce housing. It'll be a very, very small change.
If I could add real quickly, Steph, that was, and I want to make, Chris, please help me if I state anything incorrectly, but the genesis of this is they are making changes to the base zoning districts. So take HB, highway business, for example, that is probably one of the primary zoning districts that exist along our corridors. So for example, there are certainly legacy neighborhoods that abut a corridor, and that corridor has HB zoning. So Chris, if I understand correctly, it doesn't mean that 60% of the corridors abut a legacy neighborhood, but what it means is if we were to take the HB zoning and remove these changes from HB zoning, that would remove these density bonuses and increases adjacent to a legacy neighborhood, but it would also remove those density increases to all the HB zoning in the city of Asheville. Is that correct, Chris?
Yeah, it's 100% correct. These threshold changes and parking changes are primarily impacted by this. They happen in most districts, but just the HB, highway business, and RB regional business districts alone make up 50% of the 60% of the total, 50% of the total amendment. And once you start pulling these districts out, the impacts that are felt across the rest of the city as well, about 60%.
Looks like Councilwoman Roney.
Yeah, Angela, did you have all your questions answered?
Go ahead. I'll say more if they come up. Go ahead, Kim.
Okay, thank you. So I have two buckets of questions. One is, I went back and reviewed notes from our affordable housing work session, which was hours before the storm that became Helene landed on us. And so it's very possible in the way that time is stretchy through recovery processes that it has both been a really long time that we've been engaging about this, and it also is coming up really quickly for folks who've had their hands full while we have been processing this as an organization. So I just wanted to hold on to that. And these are my two curiosities. One is, can we get some examples? I know I've asked in the past, but when things, for example, we had the missing middle housing study and the affordable housing study, and there were some really tangible examples of what this would look like. My understanding after discussing this with planning and zoning members and community members is this is meant to, instead of going for larger units, to be incentivizing smaller units because we're looking at the square footage. So we had some micro units that came to us through land use incentive grants. Is that an example that we could present and say, this is the kind of unit that might be more attainable that could be on a transit corridor? Or is that not, are we off course with that being an actual example? I just think some real world examples might help the community wrap their minds around it.
I mean, I think if I can try and answer that one for you, it's, yes, micro units could be an example, right? It's really, it could run the gamut of anywhere of any smaller than average square foot unit. If we've got 100,000 square feet to play with, you're building 1,200 square feet units, that's obviously less than 100. They're going to be more expensive. And as we run down and we get to 500 square feet units, you get more in the building, probably efficiencies of scale in developing the building, as well as more attainably priced units. If you're just saying examples of smaller unit developments, is that what you're really asking for? Or?
I'm just wondering if staff has some examples from previous developments that have come through a process where it would have had to be a CZ, but it wouldn't be a CZ, that we can include this as visuals and examples. Because right now the words are just landing in community and they're like, this, I have a response to what I think that it means. But if we have some examples, it would help to visualize it for all of us.
We have a whole spreadsheet of every residential level 3 since 2021 where it falls in. And I can tell you right now, 52% of them would not be level 3s anymore, either from the baseline or for the affordability provisions.
Great.
What about, Chris, what about like a non-planner? I hear what Kim's saying, and I remember when we did the form-based code changes, which is a visual, but it was helpful to see sort of just visually kind of like what's, as a person who lives in the neighborhood, what they might experience as they're going to and from their home, to what they would see. I mean, it's hard to see on if we have a list of the types of things that would be allowed, doesn't necessarily translate in someone's mind to like, well, what would I be looking at? Like what would be different about about Hendersonville Road, for example?
So what are some examples of projects that would have benefited from this, and what do they actually look like? Right?
I'd like to layer something onto that list, Chris, because my concern for this topic and this part of the changes is that we might actually lose affordable units we might have had. So if you could, when you pull this data, just say total square foot, total number of units for us as well. Just make sure that's in there. Because Kim, when you brought up the micro units, there's a couple things there. Because of their size, they'll inherently be less expensive. But they did a land use incentive grant. They had some problems getting financing, I believe. But I actually wonder if a project like that might just come through and just not seek any affordability, right? Are there some projects that have stayed under 49 units, or maybe some that went and did 120, right? But stayed under the 100,000 square foot threshold. Like, where is that sweet spot? I think is what would help people understand, or at least me understand, if we're gaining affordability, hoping for affordability, or giving up affordability.
Yep. And so thank you for adding to that. My second question is, having reviewed the planning and zoning meeting and the public engagement involved, it does seem like to me that we have a sequencing problem on all 5 of the items, but I'm going to focus on the 3 that we're discussing right now. So because in my opinion, we're having a sequencing problem, it's possible that we're engaging the public, but we're not hearing that things are out of order. And so one example is, it sort of goes along with my previously stated concern about sequencing. We have the missing middle housing study, and we have the displacement risk assessment, and we have the affordable housing study plans. They had a lot of public engagement. And instead of bringing those forward, we have these recommendations. And I understand a lot of the reasons why that are going around and under and over our plans that had engagement. And so it still seems to me that we have a sequencing problem with aligning our plans and our engagement with our approval processes.
Can I ask a question about that? Councilwoman Roney, is it your belief that these are not aligned with our plans? These are recommendations
from the legacy neighborhoods, especially those comments that we heard this week, is they seem that they're different, and that we're not hearing the part about the engagement being in the right order. If so, then the engagement might be like, we're going to have to ask you to say no to this. And we might be having a hard time hearing that. So I guess what I'm wondering is, when will we have an opportunity to approve some of the plans that we did so much engagement around?
Well, just so we can get clear on this. So in this case, we have the Shiloh Community Plan, which was already approved by council, I believe, or was received by council. And is that what you're talking about, Kim? Are you talking about in this case, for example, take one example, the Shiloh plan?
That is one example of plans that are running into sequencing issues.
So if you read the plan, it's 54 pages long. Much of it has nothing to do with zoning at all. And to the extent that it does, what staff is proposing today is very much consistent with the plan. However, there's some things in the plan that we could, that we have already done. Actually, the city has already done some of these things, but there are other things in this particular plan, for example, and of course, all these plans are different, but that we haven't yet done that we might have an opportunity to do. For example, the Shiloh Community Plan talks about having a gateway or gateways when you enter the neighborhood, because they don't have a formal sort of gateway or gateways. And we might have an opportunity here now that we have, for example, CDBG funds coming, or, other ways to, meaningfully work with the community to implement some of these other pieces. It was a little bit confusing to me. When I was listening to the P&Z comments, it's as if you could, the assumption was as if you could take this plan and make it a UDO amendment, but that's not what it is. It's got all kinds of different things in it, much of which aren't zoning issues at all. But I think there's loads of opportunities in here for us to work with the neighborhood to further the plan. But I would hate for these zoning changes that we're looking at today to be kind of tangled up, because I think what staff is trying to say to us is, hey, we've looked at these community plans, we've looked at these neighborhood plans, and what we're proposing in terms of these zoning changes is not inconsistent with what these plans call for. I've been talking too much. I see Deborah and Antoinette both have their hands up, so I'll shut up.
I'll defer to Antoinette and go after her.
So I'm kind of piggybacking on what Kim said about sequencing, which leads to perception. So when I talk to folks from the neighborhoods, it comes across to me as if they're saying, we've been working on these changes since 2010. And instead of working with us to do the things we've told you we wanted, time and time again, you come up with changes that we didn't necessarily ask for. And not only were they changes that we didn't ask for, you didn't include us at the beginning. So they don't feel as if they're a part of the process. And so there is a pushback because they're unable to see clearly what these changes mean for them. And in particular, they're really interested in an overlay. Very, very interested in an overlay. And they're trying to figure out if they were granted an overlay, would this even be coming forward? So it does seem to me to be an order in which we're doing things, and not providing people what they've said they wanted more than a decade ago. I think that's what's kind of rubbing folks the wrong way. That's my interpretation.
And Vice Mayor, I'm hearing what you're saying, and I'm not discounting any of those comments. I think those are, how people feel is how people feel. And there's no denying that. I am looking at this plan though, and there are parts of it that we actually have done. So I wouldn't say that there hasn't been any action or anybody, in here it says it's got these main goals. Goal number 2, provide assistance for affordable housing and home improvement. Well, this council has done that. This council has certainly done that, just as an example. So I don't want us to get so beat down on staff and this council that we're not doing anything to respond to these neighborhood actions, which are very valid and important. I mean, it says here, maintain and develop opportunities for green space. Number 3, I think we've worked pretty closely with the Shiloh neighborhood to make enhancements to the rec center and the facilities there and the parks and the gardens. So I just want to make sure that part of it is just, but there are obviously more things in there that we haven't yet done and we should do. But what I would say is, let's say you have an overlay and the overlay preserves now, first of all, let me just say another interesting fact. For example, the Shiloh plan calls for cottages, right? So what my only point is, if we're gonna do an overlay, I guess the question then is really, how do you do that Do you,
I think-
let's assume let's assume you can, let's assume you can do it, but is the overlay going, I mean, if it's consistent with their plan, for example, Shiloh, which this proposal is, it still calls for, the commercial corridor along Hendersonville Road. I mean, it doesn't eliminate a commercial corridor on Hendersonville Road.
So again, I think it's a timing issue, a sequencing issue, and a perception of a certain level of respect that is due. And I think when you ask, what does the colleges look like? I don't know that I'm the one to answer that. I think they're the ones who should be in from the beginning to come forward. I feel like we get pushback when we step ahead. And again, as it relates to the corridors, frankly, I was in conversation more with the Emma rep than with the Shiloh or East End representatives. So I think in their mind, yes, there have been conversations, but they've been saying, we want overlays. And then to have this brought to them a week before we vote, it just seemed to catch them off guard. I think they want a more comprehensive approach, because I don't think they necessarily trust us to do an overlay, even though we're going to be looking at that in March, from like March to June. I don't know that they feel confident that that's where we will land. I will say, just in the most recent past, when it was time to remove funding for repairs at East End, to move them somewhere else, because they were engaged early on and they were made aware of the necessity, they immediately were like, we get it and we'll move on, and you didn't get a pushback. What I'm saying is, here, they weren't involved early enough, and there's going to be a pushback. So I'm wondering, can we do all of these at once? So instead of February, can we do this in March after talking with them more?
So if I could, we will advance based upon council's direction in terms of these proposed text amendments. But if we step back and we just kind of recount the history of this, we have had, I don't know how many studies that have said, you guys need to look at your regulatory standards, because quite frankly, they may be impacting the ability to add to the supply of affordable housing. These particular recommendations are the ones that I believe helps us provide a decent incentive to encourage the private sector to deliver affordable housing units. And in these specific locations, they are designed to mitigate the impact, not just on legacy neighborhoods, but any adjoining residential area adjacent to these corridors. And so the goal, again, of these recommended changes is not to necessarily implement a area plan. It is fundamentally designed to help us encourage the delivery and increase the supply of affordable housing. And we, from a timing perspective, we have had conversations about this. Miss and Middle study direct us in this direction. So there's been a number of things that, from a policy perspective, have said, again, go towards regulatory changes, and they should help increase the supply of affordable housing. And if I have said anything, Steph, Chris, Ben, that is incorrect, please Don't be too harsh, but correct me. Anything?
Deborah, I completely agree with your comments. Thank you.
This is Stephanie, and I'll say the same.
I both,
I think Maggie
I'm
had
gonna-
her hand up first. You're good? Okay, Bob.
Thank you. So I'm just wondering, so are we proposing so could we separate the threshold piece out from this? Is from the legacy neighborhoods? I guess this is more to my colleagues. Is the issue the thresholds, or is it the parking minimums and the district specific standards as well?
I don't
It
know.
sounds like all of it, Bo. That's what I'm hearing. It sounds like all of it.
Okay. And then, so what specific concerns, I did watch the P&Z meeting yesterday. So I'm wondering the concerns that we have, would time actually help those and mitigate that? So in other words, is the primary concern just the engagement piece, or are there other concerns that we would be able to actually resolve?
That's a good question, Bo. When I heard the word March presented, it did make me wonder if we're still going to hear the request is an overlay, and this is not an overlay. So will we get the same engagement? And is it possible that our engagement is that we're not hearing what the expectation is and we're going to move forward in a different way? And that won't change between now and March. I was kind of looking back through our work session notes again from September as we're going through, and it's like conversations about which committees we're going to see in November and December, and then pieces of it in January. All those things got delayed, all those parts of engagement. But it does make me wonder if we had some real world examples of projects that we're imagining that this would incentivize, and we had alongside of that what the actual outcomes would be as far as how the density bonuses work to incentivize affordability. Are we giving away the levers that would result in the public benefits our community expects? And is that why they're asking for an overlay? Because if so, we'll end up in the same position in March or April or May. We can keep pushing this out. We'll still get the same community engagement.
Okay. And also, I'm wondering where we got the 60% number from, and if in actuality, if we're looking at where our neighbors are concerned in Emma and in Shiloh along that Hendersonville corridor and along Patton, if we could look at more specifically where they're concerned, and or is that 60% of what this amendment is about?
Do you mean like on a map?
Can
I think it's
staff speak to
clarification.
that maybe?
The
Yeah.
map, this interactive map, where is it? I think that would help Bo, would help
Well,
me with a few things.
Yeah. So I mean, I just heard that 60%. If we looked at the legacy neighborhoods, it sounded like that would take away 60%. And so I think what Vice Mayor Mosley was saying, well, that sounds like that 60% of this would actually affect the legacy neighborhood. So help me understand where we got the 60%, because I've only heard concerns from Shiloh and Emma. And are those specific places the 60%, or are we kind of adding that, where's that 60% number coming from?
And Burton.
But real quick, Councilman Hess, that's a good question. So the 60% is an analysis. So again, I think the direction that planning staff got was to focus on corridors for incentivizing or increasing the production of housing. And we did the corridors to stay out of the neighborhoods, quite frankly. but we did it through our base zoning district. So for example, in HB zoning, you can build a multifamily building with commercial on the ground floor today. But given the size, it probably has to come to council. So what this does is it lets there be more administrative approvals of housing projects. So the 6%, and it applies to all HB zoning in the city. So if you were to say, let's not let this happen in HB zoning anymore because HB zoning adjoins legacy neighborhoods. So we take that allowance out of that zoning district. Well, that zoning district by itself represents 60% of the corridor land area. So the way this is constructed, it's constructed in the way.
Property zone.
Property, yeah, that's right. Property. Thank you, Deborah. So it's constructed in a way that is really simple. So it's trying to do this in a simple way that people can understand. So if we deconstruct that based on the way it's come to you, it's going to remove 60% of the HB zoned land area. Does that make sense?
Okay, got it. Yeah, that did make sense. So let me ask this. So let's say we do approve these amendments for that threshold or any of these, quite frankly, could there be a sunset time, like maybe 3 years, so that we can analyze, the impacts to these neighborhoods and then maybe adjust from there? Or
This is Stephanie. I just want to note that we're not really able to provide sunsets in our ordinances, but we are always able to set up schedules to come back to you with an analysis and monitor those, whether that's annually or every 3 years. Yes, we can absolutely tell you what the impact of this zoning would have been over time.
But with the current ordinance or the current law that just passed to the state, let's say that we did change it, we really couldn't change it back, could we? Because that would be downzoning.
We could provide you with that answer on Tuesday. This isn't really changing. It is changing some of the zoning, but some pieces of it may not be considered a down zone.
Okay.
We would need legal to check that out with us to make to see if it fits those. It's a 3-part definition that the state has given. And so we just need to check it against each one of those. And I wouldn't want to do that on this meeting, but I appreciate it.
Thank you, Seth.
Am I the only one that has concerns about the tier of affordability criteria?
No.
But I think that for me, this is where if the goal is to incentivize built-in affordability by ending up with smaller units, and I heard the word attainable, and I agree that that is a goal. Attainable was mentioned in the Missing Middle Housing Study, and the difference between that and affordability, then I'm not sure we would actually get the same or better outcomes based on desperately trying to find any city that is figuring this out. But we are getting hotels, and we are getting hotels out of our public benefits table. So I'll just once again say, I'm here for an overlay with a public benefits table.
I struggle with this as well. I mean, this just isn't the approach that I personally was hoping we'd take. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around this alternative approach. And I'm not getting the affordability goals that I'm
Say more about that, Sage. Is there a slide we could look at?
Can we go back to it?
To highlight what you're talking about?
And it might be, and it's specifically tied to why I requested square footage in units. The slide, I think, was, go back. This.
Okay, so
right now you can do up to 49 units, right? And at 50, you have to come to council. So if 50 units, 450 square foot, you still got hallways and other things that add up. I mean, it's still significantly less than 100,000. So we're really just relying on the principle that more housing in general will eventually trickle down to increase affordability because more units will be available and the demand will not meet it, right? That's the theory we're all testing here. I just don't know that that has been a successful theory in Asheville thus far, and I worry about it. So for me, I wish this tier, like that first baseline, was actually tier 1 and then down and so on. But
So
I want
switch
to
it
do
like,
I would like to do
so
some analysis
you're
with
not
the
saying-
data that we get first.
you're not saying something radically different. You're just saying, could we adjust these tiers?
Yeah, why have
I thought,
zero?
because I was kind of reading you to say like, let's use a whole different system, but you're
Well, I
saying.
mean, that I would have ideally done the overlay and such, but I'm hearing that there are just issues throughout it, right? So I don't
Legal issues.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I appreciate that staff is trying to come at it from a different direction to get the same goals, but I don't like 0% affordable anywhere. I struggle with that principally for me. That's what I'm getting at. So if I'm the only one here, I don't want to like bog us down with adjusting these tiers after we've come so far and through the P&Z and all the stuff. So just wanted to bring it up. This is still bothering me.
Staff, in terms of the visual, you know, it might be helpful if you're able to grab some current multifamily housing in Asheville and say, hey, here's one that's 100,000 square feet and it has X number of units of, you know, X number of apartments, or just something to kind of help us.
Just give us some
Like,
data. Yeah.
Like, I know you keep saying that City Hall is, how many square feet is City Hall? It's 100,000 square feet, make your things up. But yeah, so I mean, like, that's a good visual sort of, but maybe if it was translated into like, how many apartment units is that typically?
Yeah. We might
Or
actually
does it- I
see
mean,
there might be a project out there that will come back to us and say, you know what, we're going to scrap the affordability because this other idea is better. You know, this threshold stuff is better.
just to get at what you're saying, Sage, in terms of what we could realistically expect to be the results. I don't have a hard time with the baseline of 100,000 square feet, just because, you know, listening to who's the fellow that does all the planning videos for us here in Asheville. I mean, we have Arby's. We have such underutilized urban corridor lots in our city that are just horrible strip mall looking things. And if we have a chance to turn some of that into housing without a whole lot of rigmarole, I do err on the side of that's a good thing. But I hear what you're saying in terms of kind of like, what is the right point? You know, what is the right way to balance that?
Esther, what about this thinks that we will not get car washes? What about this makes car washes turn into housing? Nothing in this makes car washes go away.
It does if you have a lot like a car wash or a Arby's or whatever, and you wanted to build 100,000 square foot building, but you didn't want to have to deal with going through council. So maybe that developer will then do it.
They typically just do 80 or 90,000 square feet. But yeah, I mean, I get it. That's why I said earlier, like, are we planning for housing or affordability? Are we hoping for affordability, or are we losing affordability in this? And that's what I need to come to a conclusion on. But that data will help me.
And if you show me some examples of a 300,000 square foot apartment complex in Asheville, that will help me a little bit more understand that. I mean, you know, is it one that we approved, but we only got 10% affordability out of them, and now maybe they'll use this by right process to get to 20%. Maybe that, you know, that would just help me understand a little bit. Like if you were to say, you being Chris, for example, were to say, hey, here's 8 of them you guys have considered and done, and here's what you required of these developers, and here's what they, how big their projects are. So just kind of line it up with this chart and see.
What I heard Chris say was that he thinks about 50% wouldn't have come to council.
But would have gotten to the same result.
Maybe not.
Yeah,
But we'll find out.
Yeah.
I will chime in on timeline just while I'm on mic. If there is enough concern about the timeline and there is something that can be achieved by March or April, I can support that. But if nothing is going to shift, then I'm having a hard time with the delay. I will add to that it just seems like so much has happened since we scheduled all this, you know, the flood, everything has changed. And I don't know that if we vote on this on Tuesday, that an application will show up on Thursday. You know what I mean? Like, it's not the same Asheville right now. And I don't know how the development community is responding. And if there's just a bunch of people ready to buy land and build big, it seems like a hard time.
I'll jump in. I've been doing a lot of listening. What it really feels like for me, it's just like philosophical. Several years ago, we as a council said that we wanted to look at regulatory changes to get more housing in the community. And do we actually want that? Do we actually mean it? Because I just keep going, okay, well, what if we do this? Well, then that, I don't know what impact it would be. And so it just kind of feels like, do we want this strategy or not? Because I keep hearing the proposals from staff that, you know, are planners who have done a lot of community engagement. We started with other proposals earlier in the process, and that seemed too far afield for several of us on council. And if we pull back even further, what is the impact? So do we believe that adding more supply will help or not? Because I don't know what that perfect policy will look like. And I don't hear council going, yeah, we've nailed it. And so that's a concern for me. I would like us to move forward with some approach that has impact towards this goal, that we know that generations of having huge amounts of our zoning for single family has created this really concerning scarcity. And so it's almost like, are we chasing a unicorn? If we don't want to pursue a supply strategy, then let's just call it and stop putting our staff through the work. Because I'm just hearing a lot of like, what does this unicorn look like? So that's rhetorical, but that's me kind of digesting as we're all exploring this conversation.
Maggie, do you think when this started and we were looking at it more broadly, it was like citywide with an overlay to protect some areas, vulnerable areas, right? But now it is corridors. Like, so I almost wonder if we as a council and staff have allowed it to shrink where it didn't need to, because it could have been citywide with the overlay to protect the particular areas, but then the rest of the city would have been upzoned, not just the corridors. So, you know, I wonder if there's room to go back. I mean, I don't know. I want us to get more housing. We need more housing policy. We need more housing supply. We are struggling as a team going into our team building next week to figure out how to, I don't know, half wants an overlay, half wants this kind of other process where it's just universal and corridors. And those two are hard to marry right now for me. So I don't know how this vote is going to go.
And I think where this was staff kind of listening to us in September saying, what's the easiest first step? So again, I'd be very disappointed if we abandon pursuing supply side strategies. I really would. I think it's a really important method. I think that we have learned, again, through long series of communities across the country really prioritizing single family. I would be really bummed if we backed off of this strategy entirely, but I also feel like I hear enough concerns, and I respect every one of you, that I don't know. Again, I just like, if we don't want to do the strategy, let's just call it. I'd be really disappointed. I think it's important. I think it's an important process to move forward on.
I don't think we can abandon the strategy. I, like you, will be very disappointed because we do have to address the supply side, but I don't see folks anywhere on here saying we shouldn't. It's just a matter of how. And if it's just the corridors, I mean, it's a good start, but it is not a solution.
So I appreciate what you said, Maggie, because it's kind of a mirror of what I've been saying about equity, because what we're coming up against is supply side versus equity. So in response to your statement, I would say, if we don't want to be equitable, let's abandon equity and let's just say it. But I happen to believe we could do both. I believe we could, increase supply while paying attention to vulnerable neighborhoods. And so this is what happens, because then it becomes a philosophical discussion, almost which matters more. And then I think that kind of causes people angst, right? So it's not about not needing supply. Just like when saying you want supply, you're not saying, forget what these legacy neighborhoods want, right? So I happen to believe it doesn't have to be one or the other. And I believe the best way to get us where we need to be is with heightened levels of community engagement from the most vulnerable portions of our community. And it does not seem yet that for these particular three that we've done that. It's not a slide on staff. It's not a slide on us. I'm just saying we have to do the work.
I hear all that, and I appreciate the both and I agree with the sentiment that we need to move forward with our equity priorities centered. What's on my mind though, and maybe it's because it's conceptual and we don't have any maps yet, is let's fast forward 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 20 months, however long it gets to being where we might have an overlay. Are we going to be at a point where we're still saying Hendersonville Road and Patton Avenue are going to remain low density? I fear that that is where we'll go. And I don't know, I feel like we have decades of plans saying that's some of the best places for us to gain density on the transportation corridors where the infrastructure is.
So just from a historical perspective, it's not uncommon for land that was at one point the least desirable, where vulnerable communities live. The majority population then decides this is the most desirable. And then it just leads to time and time and time again, more and more displacement. Again, the reason why Emma is where they are now is because they were displaced from the Haywood Road corridor and all of that area. So they are remembering what it's like to be displaced, and they're saying, whoa, it's coming for us again. So that's their perspective, because wherever they are, folks decide now this is the hot spot when it wasn't developed before. But now that certain groups want to be there, now it's a hot spot.
I mean, I'm feeling like this isn't, we got a couple more people to speak. I mean, we could debate this for quite a long time.
I have a suggestion, Mayor. I mean, some of these
only
things,
if it's a good one, Sage.
well, I don't know how you're going to feel it, but it ends up in us reconvening in March about it, purely because I'm not actually convinced that meeting with neighborhoods again will get us to another solution. I think what Maggie is saying is a very pointed comment. Do we believe in upzoning our major corridors or not? Like, I can't imagine, these are two major roads, right? And it is where we have always said we need housing, but we need maps. Community needs maps. I can't move forward without a map. My brain needs a map. We need some.
What kind of map?
We're going to get it to us. I know. I keep hearing we'll get it to us, but I needed like.
It was in this presentation. Is it a different map?
Well, I saw a GIS layer screenshot. I mean, like, is there a GIS? Can I comb through a map, zooming in and out? Do we have it online? GIS has it. Those were just screenshots of it. So that map.
Yeah, Steph is saying yes. I mean, yes. I think you're saying
they do. I can tell from the image. You can. So I need that. And then we have our retreat. And I feel like our retreat may impact how we address housing in general as a community after a disaster. I think we're going to learn, like, some of the stuff I talked with the interview for the retreat was around what's the collective economy, what's happening, what is commonly happening after these disasters for 5 years. Like, we may come out of this more understanding as a team that is crucial to upzone along these corridors. I feel like that may come from that conversation. So I'm okay with reconvening. I don't know that that will address legacy neighborhood concerns. So maybe we can layer that in somehow. But I do want to be clear, I do think this can't go away. We have to do some upzoning, particularly on corridors. I would like to have seen a broader city effort with protection around vulnerable places. But so to be clear, I want this stuff to go forward. I don't want it to be abandoned.
Can I jump in really quickly?
Yeah, I saw Bo had his hand up, but he put it down.
I think Bo stood down once he saw my hand, maybe, or maybe not.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Okay. So I'm listening to the conversation and I appreciate it, but sometimes I believe that we're going down a rabbit hole, making a lot of assumptions without just making a decision. I don't think the conversation means that we want to abandon this strategy. I don't believe that going back to the legacy groups means that we'll just be at a standoff. An overlay is not the only mitigation strategy that we can use. Let's just go back to the table and see what they come up with and help them in making that decision, because we can go with other mitigation strategies for these specific areas that feels good for them. I don't think we should enter the conversation with the assumption that the overlay is the only thing that can protect these neighborhoods and conserve their historic image. Let's go have the conversation. I think what I'm hearing, they want the respect of being on the front end of the conversation and that to become our practice, and not make the decision, do all the work, host other engagement series with other people, get close to a decision or get close to a baked product, and then add them on the end of the conversation to see if they'll say yay or nay. Just give them the respect without the assumption or skepticism. Let's just do it. Wait until March and let's move on with our meeting.
So in other words, have some more engagement and then put this back on our March agenda for vote.
We know what they want based on past engagement. We know what their fears are based on the historic pattern. I believe we're smart enough to go with other strategies for these specific areas, and we can stay true to our strategy.
Thank you.
Well, I think what I'm hearing staff say is doing a differential strategy for sections will be very difficult, because the way they've drafted this change is it affects all zoning in HB, highway business, for example. And it doesn't allow for a carve out for certain geographic areas with the same zoning classification. That's what I think I heard Ben say. So I do, I think community engagement is great. I think staff is beating themselves over the head a little because they feel like they actually have done quite a lot of community engagement already on this, but obviously that's not what we were hearing this week. So we know the drill there, that can happen. But it may be that what we end up considering in March is exactly what we're set to consider Tuesday night. And that may be a reality just because of the sort of impossibility of like tailor making a zoning code change is all. I'm just trying to set expectations. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe there's some way to do it. Bo and Sage are going too, but Shanika, are you? I wanted to make sure you were.
No, I'm good. And that brings clarity. So what you're saying is based on what's presented, you can't have little specialties or little nuance for certain sections.
Not in the way they've drafted it currently, no. And I don't know how that exactly could be done. But and maybe after this meeting, staff could send us the link for the neighborhood plans. Because I feel like what we're looking at here is consistent with these neighborhood plans. So it's a little hard to know what it would look like, how it would be any different. But anyway, I know Bo and Sage and we've got guest speakers too, don't we? Waiting in the wings. I'm sorry.
I guess I just two things. I still am a little confused about what are like the specific concerns and needs from our legacy neighborhoods, and I'll reach out to them as well and kind of get some clarity. And then I'm wondering, it seems that we carve out a bunch of conditional zoning for a bunch other things. So I'm just wondering, why is it that hard to, carve that out? And again, it might be something beyond me. And then 3, would it be, I don't know if staff, because I was not on council at this time to do the citywide thing and pare it back. So is the citywide plan available with the overlays, and should we go more with that since that already had them protected and go big?
Sage? I think, as you indicated, Bo, the issue is protect them from what? And I believe also that there may be, a little bit of an issue in terms of what's the problem we're trying to solve? And if it is, we need to accelerate implementation of the area plans or create an overlay that does what? Or what I would suggest, because of time, is let us debrief, let us process what we've heard, and then we will provide you all with a path forward. Here are the next steps we think is appropriate. So it'll be our best guess.
Thank you. My questions are technical, so they can just go on the list. Along this path and this journey of this particular zoning, we had talked about the setbacks between the commercial corridor and the first residential house behind it and how it conflicted. Is this at a 15-foot setback or a 5-foot setback? And which also makes me wonder technically if some of these more sensitive areas near Shiloh on Hendersonville Road, example, could have a greater setback if that would help that community, a greater buffer. Second thing is this is a legal question. If we take Haywood Road corridor, for example, it has a form-based code. The commercial allowance of use is not only the corridor, but also because of the code overlay, it is the 2 houses behind, sometimes 3, depending on, it's like a depth. And is that not in play here? And if so, what does that mean to something like Haywood Road? Because we can't downzone. And this sounds like those maybe houses behind would still be considered possibly commercial. I just need some clarity on that for Tuesday or whenever we bring this to the dais. And I guess generally, I want to voice that I think we could have done more in some areas. It just doesn't have to be just corridors. Some communities, some neighborhoods could really benefit from multifamily upzoning all across the board. Like when this started, I said, we need to go multifamily with tiers throughout residential neighborhoods so that people can get bigger. And we're just so far from that. So I hope in the future we'll get to some of that stuff, but we are really trapping ourselves on these corridors and it makes me a little uncomfortable.
Just in terms of process, yeah, I hear you, Maggie. I'm there with you. Deborah, you just said you're going to take all these comments and get with staff. I mean, this is supposed to be on our agenda Tuesday night. So, I personally am ready to hear it Tuesday night. I am also fine to hear it in March if this is what it is and it's going to be a meaningful change to our zoning code to make housing more readily buildable. I don't, so I'm just signaling to you, I don't want you, Deborah, to have to go pull this off our agenda if we have a majority of council that does want to hear and vote on this Tuesday night. So if council would be willing to indicate, I realize we talked about a whole bunch of different things here. And, but bottom line, it would be helpful. Would it be helpful to know that? Since we're not talking again until Tuesday.
I'll jump in and say that I'm ready to vote for it, but I'm wise and respectful enough to honor what the legacy neighborhoods have said. And I believe that we can wait until March to hear what that conclusion is.
Council, how about Shanika's suggestion there? Is that something you would?
I want to see these move through. I do have some concerns about the threshold, up to 300,000. I think we could iron those out in that time too. But I do want to see these through. I'm torn. I'm torn right now. I think I have to go back. I want to reach out to the legacy neighborhoods myself, really hear what they have to say, hear what their concerns are, and then go from there.
Bo, this is just in terms of process, though. Shanika is suggesting that she's ready to vote, but she would like, out of respect, be willing to wait until March to allow the legacy neighborhoods to talk with staff and us additionally. Is that something you can support in terms of the process?
Yes.
So Mayor, just for clarity, you're saying vote Tuesday.
They're not saying vote.
Here.
No,
Okay,
no, no,
I
no.
just
That
wanted
is
to
not.
make
That's
sure.
not what. That is not what I heard Shanika suggesting.
She said she is-
saying she is ready to vote, but out of respect, she is glad to wait until March, so that there can be some additional time. Bo is throwing a wrench in there because he wants to mess with these tiers, Bo, and so, but. And then, of course, Sage has her usual like 10 things she wants to change about it, but we'll see where she lands. So is anybody else, would anybody else object to having this on the first, or whatever, what's our first Tuesday meeting in March? I don't. Maggie Burleson with the date, I don't know what it is.
This is Kim here, so I'm just going to chime in and say that the sooner we have real maps to really engage the public, I'm happy to do the community engagement that I always do around this. It just, once again, will help to have some detailed access to maps.
And I see Steph making a curious face because we've got maps in this presentation. So I don't know what, so somebody on staff, tell us about what kind of maps you think you're hearing requested.
GIS layer,
GIS layer.
something we
So,
can sit around and look at.
Do we
We'll share
have,
the existing maps we have with you. That's an interactive GIS layer. Absolutely.
perfect.
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Hey, Steph, can someone that's pretty quick with GIS, maybe make a layer that we can turn on and off for what the legacy neighborhoods are referring to? So we can see that 60%.
Sure.
That's helpful. If not,
Well,
I'll do it.
yeah, I think what Ben was saying is it's highway business. It's the highway business zoning
They
district.
can just draw a box around it and show us. Yeah.
I have a question too, back to staff, and I'm trying to remember the timeline that you shared. How quickly could we have draft ideas of an upzoning overlay that's broader than the corridors?
Wait, are you asking to expand this back into the full overlay concept?
It was the last thing council said they wanted. I
Okay.
remember twice, 4 heads saying they wanted this.
I'm just,
Well,
what I'm wondering is like, I would love you to say like, we can rip something really quick and look at it in March. Like how fast forwarding could we do that?
let me ask a question. What would that be? So yes to the question about timing, but what is that? What that thing is that you just asked for? What would it be?
No
It would-
parking requirements throughout.
Do what?
No parking requirements throughout the city except for in the overlay that's protecting. It would mean all these
Okay.
things throughout.
But this doesn't mean you're putting a high-rise apartment in the middle of Shiloh or in the middle of North Asheville. That's not what it means. What does it really mean?
Well, in parking, it just means easier to build. I mean, the parking requirements are complicating lots of things. It means better use of lane.
Hold on a second. I thought it meant what we were talking about before was implementing allowable uses such as duplexes, triplexes, quadruplexes, cottages, all flag lots, all those sorts of things, reducing parking requirements, maybe changing setbacks. I don't know, I'm making stuff up now, but it was all these things. And
Yes.
then because we had made it citywide, that immediately triggered the need for overlays within legacy neighborhoods that basically froze their current zoning, which would not allow these things, or if that's the current state of things.
Right.
Is that what y'all are talking about?
Let me,
Yes. And it was beautiful.
hold on, I think it could be something different, right? Where it's,
But Maggie, wasn't that what was being
Exactly.
proposed before?
hold on, just give me a second. It might take me a little while to get my thoughts out. I know I can be slow and wordy, so I'm trying to be focused. So missing middle policy in neighborhoods that have less risk to gentrifying, that's what that could look like. It could also look like higher density on the corridors. So both would be in together. And then it would look like no change in the most vulnerable neighborhoods, because we know that we can't necessarily downzone places based on the current legislation. And the reason I ask this is, like, right now I feel a struggle to say, let's look at this current proposal and take potentially 6% out, even if that were possible. Because I'm just going, oh my gosh, we need to get this strategy moving quickly. But if we saw it in the context of where there would be more multifamily in neighborhoods, and the whole picture would show we are taking a big step, because whittling this down further just makes me feel like we're never going to get to meaningful policy change. And so really to staff, like, how fast forwarded could we go to start getting us something that looks at upzoning overlays?
If I just pop in, it's the Planning and Urban Design Director, Steph Dahl here again. What Deborah mentioned, us having a debrief and being able to answer these questions, I think applies here as well. So there's a lot of information coming to us. We want to do right by you. We want to do right by the community. These are great ideas and good conversation. I don't have that answer today. We have a lot of people that are working like with the FAST team, and trying to do variances for historic structures and various other initiatives. So it might take some repositioning, but we can see what we can do to make things fit within a great governance process, if that makes sense.
You know what I'm going to be asking, Mayor, I'm sure.
Hold on. Yeah, we're figuring it out. This
Okay.
conversation is not going to clear. I saw Internet's hand go up. Did you have something to say?
Yeah. I did, but wow, we belabored this. I just don't want us to lose sight of one of the main reasons these neighborhoods wanted that overlay. That's not an overlay, that's an underlay, whatever, is because they were really interested in a heightened level of engagement as being a requirement. So for them, the engagement and involvement is really the thing, more so than saying no to different types of development. Their main focus is being included and being engaged and having what they say actually get back to council and matter.
Such an inherent challenge with the by right zoning process, because you can require community engagement, which I assume this does require some community engagement, but it doesn't come to council for approval. So it's, that's inherent in these by right density zoning changes. Did somebody else raise their hand?
Yeah, I'll chime in. Shanika had tossed out the idea of March, and that makes sense to me.
The proposals that we would have been hearing Tuesday night.
Do we need to calendar it today? I'm kind of curious to hear from staff on this and what
Oh
they
my
come
God,
back with.
Maggie's gonna spontaneously explode if we don't tell her.
Because
when
we
we're
have
gonna
to, right?
hear.
Because if we're moving something off a current agenda, we have to calendar it. Okay.
I can say that it's been publicly noticed as a public hearing. So if you're not going to hear it, I can put it on the agenda for continuance. Or if you want to just totally withdraw it and then bring it back again at a different date, we can redo the public hearing notices.
Although this went through P and Z, so I don't want to upset that process. I think we need to continue to a date certain. I cannot even believe we've gotten through this entire conversation without hearing from Brad, but this is, we might hear in a minute.
And again, just as a reminder, there are 2 more items that are public hearing items.
Yeah.
Related to amendments to the UDO. And
So if there are not further objections, the plan is to hear this item in this current format, unless something changes, at our March 11th council meeting. So it'll be on our agenda Tuesday night with a motion to continue to March 11th. There you go, Maggie. Yes, everybody. Yes. Okie dokie. Thank you. Well, Deborah, I think we're ready to move to the next item.
thank you, Mayor.
Chris, do you want to keep going with the public hearings?
Sure, yeah, so that's the resident petition for flag lot changes and cottage changes to the UDO that has been on the agenda for some time. There have not been any changes made to this since the last appearance, and it has been reviewed against State Bill 382 to make sure nothing needed to be changed, and it was found that it was that it was not in conflict with 382. But just a reminder, this is a proposal to allow reduced flag lots with structure size limitations citywide, of course, and reduce cottage requirements from 5 units down to 2 units, among other changes.
Did you have staff's
This is
position on
this is Barry's stuff coming at us again.
And it's the same thing. We were waiting on the overlay to hear this. It's the overlay. I mean, why don't we just make the overlay?
Sequencing.
I know. And I know we all sit here in this, we've been on this screen before like this and said, we need the overlay, we need the overlay. And we're still just on the overlay. So I don't know what to tell you. I want to support these flag lots. I want to support these, but I know that many of us want the overlay first. So overlay.
Okay, well, I just because we enjoy it so much, we'll once again put Barry's items on our agenda. I would be curious, I mean, how many of these neighborhood plans call for flag lots, cottages, those kinds of things, like the Shiloh neighborhood plan. It'd be sort of interesting to know that. But this is, this item is led by Barry, so it's kind of up to him to make that case. Are you asking whether it's on?
Has anyone talked with the applicant and they want to keep it on?
I spoke with Barry a couple of weeks ago, and he wanted to confirm that his items were on February 11 agenda, and I did.
Okay. So I assume this will get voted down because there won't be an overlay. Maybe I'm wrong in that, but in that case, I'm hoping that we will bring it back as good planning and policy and housing policy at the wrong time.
I mean, I'm supportive of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I am, but I don't know. I don't know how realistic it is that we're going to get.
I mean, folks still waiting for the overlay to be able to support this. Yeah.
I mean, Steph, do we know the timing on the overlay project?
It's the same project. It's the same.
Well, we presented this to you. Nikki Reed and I gave you an update about our housing initiative and mentioned that after we worked on these UDO amendments and getting those presented to you, which will now push to the side to March, In March is when we would start our 3-month process for review of the draft overlay. So that was our sequencing. And the idea would be that in March, we're working with community. In April, we're at potentially at planning and zoning, April and May, with June being the date for you all to look at that overlay. And so we will await additional input from you on that item.
It doesn't sound like it can really happen faster than that.
Well, as I mentioned before, I would love to spend some time talking with Chris and others on staff to see how we can reposition things after we've received your input. I just don't have the ability right here in this meeting to tell you how quickly I could accelerate that project and reposition some people to take that on.
Got it.
Thank you.
In the meantime, Maggie, this is coming to us Tuesday night. I mean,
Okay, and in the interest of time, the last item under new business is on CDBG DR. We do have a presentation scheduled for that on today's agenda. So I'm going to skip over that right now. And Mayor and Council, if you are okay with it, I am proposing to skip over the 8-week agenda review as well as our recovery briefing agenda review. Those documents are linked for you so you can see planned upcoming items. And barring any concerns from you, I'm recommending that we go ahead and launch into our presentations because we do have a few outside speakers that have been waiting to present. Is that okay with you all?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, then I am going to turn it.
Rachel, if I could
Sure.
ask, does everybody have a hard stop at 1 o'clock? Because I wanted to make sure that the presenters knew the time constraints. Looks like we can go over, but they will be as efficient as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you, Deborah. Important point. So I am now going to turn it over to Bob Spence and Todd Hoos with FEMA to provide an update on individual assistance data for our community.
All right. Good afternoon. I'm Bob Spence. I'm the FEMA liaison for the city of Asheville in Montgomery County.
And Todd Hoos, External Affairs. I've also been here primarily in Buncombe County, but leading intergovernmental affairs.
So with that, the first slide you see here is our overview of FEMA's outreach and assistance that's been paid to the overall state. And later on, we'll have a couple slides that deal with just the city of Asheville. But to date, we have $352 million that's gone out as assistance to individual assistance to the people who need it the most in their hands. Of that, also another number I want to highlight here is 155 that we have statewide in direct housing or direct leasing too. And with that, we'll go on to the next slide. All right, so this is a slide on our direct housing just as it relates to the city of Asheville. So for the one number, and this does include some of the county data because direct leasing is across the board. So when we talk about direct leasing, we're talking about just not where we're doing the leasing for the applicant who, whether it's an apartment or we're talking something called MHU, which is a single wide mobile home, or where it could be a travel trailer. So overall, there was 925 who were referred over to the direct housing population. Of that, as of today, the number as of this slide was done last week was 54. It's actually, we've had 58 people, what we call licensed in. That's where they get handed the keys to their new home or their new apartment for FEMA within the city and the county on that. So that's about a 10% approval rate. Our current number that's out there is on this side, it had 95 people that we're working towards to find a home. So if we've already got 58 out of the way, that would, just leave 47 more or less than 40 more, that would be due. And we have identified enough lots and units for that population. So we're on average right now, probably licensing 1 to 2 units in a day. We expect a little jump in the next couple days because we have quite a few units that are waiting for Duke Energy tie-ins or some final inspections. So we may get 7 or 6 people licensed in within the next 10 days. So we're pretty good. I'd say we're about 60% done getting people licensed in for direct housing. Next slide, please. So here's some Asheville specific numbers that I want to kind of highlight on. So this is assistance that's gone directly to the citizens in the city of Asheville. So to date, $48 million has gone into the hands of 31,000 residents of your city. That's a quite figure. On the first number, if we looked at the total for the county is 115 million. So of that, 50 million, close to 50 million has gone just to the city residents. So if you look at that number, over a third of all public or individual assistance that FEMA has provided has been in the county and the city of Asheville for the entire disaster. So y'all were ground zero, you all had the most damage, but a third of that pot has gone into of the money that FEMA's put on the ground has actually been physical dollars in the hands of folks. With that, we've also have some rental assistance numbers. That's where we're helping people with rental assistance. So currently for the county, our rental assistance number is 928, which is up 58. Our TSA, our transitional shelter assistance, the number for you is 384. For the county, it's 642. So what we're seeing is a decrease in our people who are living in the hotels right now and an increase in people getting rental assistance. Those are all positive features and stuff that we want to highlight. So the goal is to get them out of the temporary, which the hotel rooms, and get them into permanent housing, whether it's a long-term lease or a direct housing unit or something. So we're seeing good positive shift there. That number of rental assistance just in the last 24 hours jumped almost 58. 58 applicants just in the county and the city have been put into and approved for rental assistance, those are all good figures. So all the projections we have are positive. They're more, the delays are out there. But we're still working to get everybody who needs assistance out there. If you look at the raw total of the 31,000, almost 32,000 people, and if you look at your residential number, I believe your households that you have in the city is roughly 38,000. So pretty much 32,000 have received some assistance, some physical money in their hand for the city. Todd?
I was going to cover another thing. So the $48 million that's gone out. There's also another section. There's another 38,000, almost 39,000 that's gone towards other needs assistance. So with FEMA assistance to individuals, there are housing assistance on one side and then other needs assistance on the other side. So we can go up to a maximum of $42,500 for their home, which can also go towards private roads and bridges. And we also go to the other side. Other needs assistance includes things like personal property, transportation, the serious needs assistance. You've heard that as the 750. Funeral assistance, moving and storage, childcare, cleaning and sanitize, just a couple $300 to a particular household, just to help them kind of get up on their feet. A dental assistance, and you've seen probably a good bit of what's called displacement assistance. It's a new assistance program. It's around $3,100 to $3,500. It was right off the top immediately. If they said we are not able to stay in our household, they received displacement assistance in addition to the 750, and that paid for about 14 days of their housing needs until we either placed them into a hotel or they determined rental assistance was going to be available, or they came straight into any other type of housing assistance. So there's two sides to that 42.5.
Yeah, one additional point I want to talk about is on the TSA, or the transitional shelter, to people living in the hotels. So currently, you probably heard that there has been if someone becomes ineligible, because we can't, normally it's because if they become ineligible, they're staying in a hotel room, is because we can't contact them. We're trying to reach that person, see if we can, so they can renew and stay in the hotel if they still need it, or get them over to a more permanent solution in the rental assistance. So in the current period we have right now, which was, in other words, if they received a notice back on the 24th of January, the move-out date would be on February 8th. Of that list, February 7th. So currently on that list, there's 98 people, but we have done a lot of outreach, not just FEMA. We have actually physically gone to the hotels to do individual interactions at the hotels they're staying at with our DSA crews, our disaster survivor assistance crews. Also, the state has sent in a mass team who has gone to one of the hotels to kind of get those people moved on. And then also the county and the state new DCM, or their disaster case management, has also been contacting them, whether they're using a reverse 911 or what, because they have the full database with the names of the people and that, and doing a contact saying, hey, FEMA needs to talk to you. If you still need housing, we need you to call us. So we've been doing our best to get into contact of those who are coming up to say, hey, if you still need assistance, you need to update your stuff so we can still provide it to you. We're always trying to say yes. That's all. That's our bottom line. We want to say yes if you still need assistance, but we're finding a lot of the non-contact has been our main issues. In other words, we left multiple messages, called, and they haven't called us back of that 98 number. So we're trying to do that personal one-on-one, meeting them at the hotel if we can, or put a flyer under the hotel room door. We are not allowed to knock on the doors of the hotel, but we're doing our best to at least get the message out.
You know, it's important, and I see that someone did raise a hand. We're happy to cover some questions. The biggest travesty would be those individuals who don't reach out to us who are eligible for additional assistance. They could potentially stay in the hotel. There are more numbers that could be going into direct housing. And as a disaster, the cycle continues, their situation changes. And so it's so important for them to stay in touch with FEMA. It's important. That's something you can help us with. Just if people have a question on what's going on with their case, send them to the Disaster Recovery Center and get an update on their case. And if we can't help them, we're still connected to you in the city and to the county and the state. There are other resources we can direct them to. It would just be such a shame for them to be standing in the lobby of a hotel on the 7th of February when they really should be still in their room.
Yep. In our last slide, we talk about a little about where they can go to and how we can further help them.
Next slide.
Could we respond to the question?
Yeah, sure.
Shanika. Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't have a question. I had more or less a comment, and maybe a question will come out of it. But I've been helping some folks who have been compromised during a disaster get in contact with you all, whether it's for direct assistance, housing assistance, or for an inspection. And I believe on you all's side of the conversation, it's been, hey, we've been reaching out, we've been calling. And I think on their side of the conversation, it's more or less like, I don't know that this is a FEMA representative calling me because I can't identify the number. So I guess my question is, have you all explored other ways of making contact other than by telephone? Like, do you send out a text message so the person knows I can identify this number with the FEMA rep?
That's a wonderful question. And what we are bound by is they identified the way they want to receive the communication. So they could have told us mail or text or phone.
Or all. They can check them all.
They can say, hey, you can reach us anyway. Our challenge is, and we've always wanted to do this and we're not allowed to legally, we would love to be able to take our inspector's phone number and mask it as a FEMA number and then have them contact. Because, you know, you're looking for some person from New Jersey that's here in Western North Carolina, and you're like, I don't need a new warranty on my car. And it turns out it's our inspector. So we always hope that people do it with a text, because our inspectors are really good about saying, this is a FEMA inspection. But yeah, we have some hurdles to that. And and as you know, those people, those are in the hotel and those out of the hotel, they're being bombarded by phone calls and solicitations, and they've just went through a terrible disaster. It's overwhelming.
So, and also if they have did their registration online, they can download the FEMA app and have a unique number log in there where if they go in and check, it will actually show them, hey, FEMA's trying to get a hold of you. Please respond, so they can go and update their preferences at any time by either going to disasterassistance.gov or call our 800 number, 800-621-3362, or they can just visit one of our DRCs. So for currently right now, of course, as you know, we had a location at Asheville Mall. That location was closed because we had some issues with the climate control in there. But we have two smaller centers open right now, one in Weaverville and one at the Fairview Library. But we're right now in the middle of scoping a new location, which is going to be on the AB Tech campus downtown here in Asheville. So it'll be on the bus route and everything. So people will be able to go there. But at any time there's someone who's having a difficulty, our disaster recovery centers, we have case management people there who will work with that person. That if they can get there, that's where they should go. Don't, if you call the line, you may be on wait for a considerable amount of time. But if you go to disaster centers, most of our wait lines in the disaster recovery centers are fairly short. 15 to 30 minute wait. And then they can actually talk face to face with the person. If they say, hey, you're missing this document, we need this document, they can really have that one-on-one, tell them exactly what they need. Because sometimes, in FEMA, we have something, everybody will receive a letter, something called what we call a determination letter. Some people call it a denial letter. It's not a well-written letter. It's written by attorneys. I'm not saying that attorneys can't write good letters, but for the attorneys that are online, but it does have a lot of stuff that says, hey, FEMA, we got your application, but we can't make a determination on your eligibility or continued eligibility until we get more documentation. But all they see is the part saying they think they're hearing no, and they kind of shut down. We don't want them to do that. If you get a determination letter, that's part of the process. So get to the DRC, bring the letter, get on the app, because on the app you can actually take pictures of your documents and upload them off your cell phone. If you don't know how to do it, everybody has a friend or someone who can assist them, or even some of the volunteer agencies out there can do it. So we like to encourage that. I think that if you look at our numbers where we're doing assistance, Asheville Mall location was doing close to 200 folks a day. And currently we have those numbers split up between the Weaverville location and the Fairview. I know that the location at AB Tech is going to be what we need to service long-term. It will be large. It'll be actually probably become a regional disaster recovery center. So as some of the counties that surround us and their disaster centers close down, they'll be able to come to Asheville and get the service.
Just to give you some context, just last Saturday, we had 80 new registrations and $3.4 million went out just on Saturday. 13 million last weekend went out, and this is just to individuals. Now, the individuals, it's important. This big money coming to individuals, it's wonderful. The big money is really coming with public assistance, private roads, the roads, the bridges, the buildings. There's so much more money coming, and your government's working so closely with us to get those projects on the books. If you've been down to Azalea Park, unbelievable work that's been going. The Army Corps has been tasked by FEMA and funded by FEMA to accomplish that task. And they've got Ashbrit down there, the contractor, and my gosh, that park is going to be up and in beautiful shape shortly. It really looks great. I hope you're able to swing through.
Thank you.
And another high point to end on is the registration deadline, which was supposed to be on February 8th, has been extended for 30 days. So the new date is now March 8th. So people still have time, and you can still apply. We encourage them to apply. If they haven't already, just apply right now. At least you'll be in a protected status. But with the extension, don't wait till the March 8th extension. Go ahead. If you have some loss or uninsured loss that's not been covered and you have a need, apply and see if we can fill that need for you. Again, we're trying to say yes. We need those people to do that.
Or underinsured.
Underinsured.
Because if they register now by the deadline, And then a year from now, their contractor comes up and it is not enough with the insurance. Those people with the insurance are still eligible for the additional federal FEMA funding. So if they're got their insurance said, hey, we're going to replace it. It wasn't enough. They need to come back to FEMA as long as they've registered and say, could I get my 42.5? I need a little bit more for me to have safe, secure, stable housing. We want to find a way to hand these monies out. It's not about saving money. It's about getting every dollar in the hands of people in Western North Carolina that need it.
I have one question, y'all. Thanks for being here. On the first couple slides, you were talking about, housing and placing folks, but we had over 1,000 landlords sign up to become possible housing. Are some of those in there, this group of can't get in touch with? Because, like, for example, I'm one and I've never received a call. And I hear from people regularly that haven't. So where are those 1,000 landlords in this situation?
So on the direct lease program, which was on our slide number 2, I don't know if we can go backwards. The need for actual direct lease was the number that originally came out was 925 that would possibly be eligible, but the actual need is only 95 people, which is only 10%. So we have identified more units than are needed. Now with that, as our housing assistance goes up, people can go on their own and find the landlord and work out a rental agreement. And with our rental assistance, we are paying up to 200% fair market rent based off the HUD table on this chart here. So if they find one bedroom at up to $2,200 or $2,600, almost $2,700, and that's all they can have, and they bring us a contract that they have a lease for that, then they can be reimbursed up to that amount as the rental assistance provided. So I think you'll see a lot of the people went into the rental assistance. So the overall total for the county on who's receiving rental assistance is 928 right now that are receiving the rental assistance on that. So I think in the very beginning, there might have been a lot of need, and now more and more people are saying, hey, I found another solution on that. But if you look at the dollars going out, it's definitely going out in the hands of the population.
And the rental assistance, like our housing assistance, is statutorily allowed to be up to 18 months from the date of declaration back in September. So 18 months from there. And then if there's a specific need, because the impact was pretty great here in Western North Carolina, it can be extended beyond that. But they're eligible for up to 18 months right now statutorily for the rental assistance, direct housing, direct lease, all of those options that FEMA offers.
So I just want to make sure I heard that right. We thought we needed 1,000 based on original data.
Yes.
And on this chart, we're seeing that 585 of them, or 63%, said, hey, I no longer need this.
True.
That's correct.
And we only needed 95 units in the end.
That's what we identified right now, though. Now that number fluctuates up and down for y'all. It may be that someone has said they are in a place, all of a sudden they can't extend at that location, or they're living with a friend and they now need to find a place. Then they may come over here on the direct lease. So even though we're at 95 on possible direct lease stuff, that may go up, but it also may go down. We're finding a lot of people, once they get the money in their hands, though, they prefer to just get their own.
They want to book their own, have their own agreement and everything else. And in the whole universe, throughout the entire state, the direct housing picture is only 300 households. Recognize also there's going to be some challenges. Some folks have multiple pets. Some people may have a challenge with their background check. Some people may have a specific dangerous breed, which makes it difficult for landlords to insure them as a rental. But FEMA is assured, and we always do, because a pet is part of your family, and we always include that. FEMA is going to house them. We're going to find safe, secure housing for them. If they're eligible for direct housing, they'll be with us.
Just one last question. I know we've been here too long. If I'm working with nonprofits that are still trying to help place folks that have nowhere to go and didn't get money from FEMA, how do we get you all to connect?
Well, if they did not get money from FEMA, there's normally either their case is not adjudicated, perhaps they didn't send in an insurance declaration or prove their identity or prove their occupancy. But if they're not eligible for FEMA, it's really going to be the local, state, and county resources. We do have voluntary agencies, so it's worth asking. But our voluntary agency coordinators are really only looking at other resources. So FEMA eligible, IHP eligible, would be those individuals that would receive it. And we have those 98 people in the hotels right now, households in the hotels. A number of them are going to find out that they were eligible right from the very beginning. They just didn't answer the phone.
Yeah, and that one additional thing there. So if FEMA says no, and they've been through the whole process and FEMA can't say yes to them, then the state disaster case management will pick them up under their program, which FEMA has granted the state $21 million to set up. And I know for the county here, they have 7 case managers working on that list of people who aren't eligible for FEMA. And part of that case management process with the state is to find them another alternative other than FEMA. And that's being worked with the disaster case managers and stuff. And the data that's been shared with both the city and the county. So they can identify those individuals, who they are, and reach out to them.
Some are going to have other needs. I mean, other FEMA programs are disaster legal assistance, crisis counseling, in addition to disaster case management. These are all FEMA funded programs. So there are some options. And if there's anything that you have questions, we're with Rachel a lot. And so any questions you have, we could go through Rachel, if it's all right with you, Rachel, and we will provide any documents, any information, anything that might be a resource to your people.
I'm great with that, Todd.
Thank you.
And I believe currently the county's disaster case management workload is currently roughly around 500. So it's roughly about 528 folks that have been identified who FEMA has not been able, they didn't qualify for a FEMA program, whether they were pre-disaster homeless or there's another mechanism there where they could have actually been living, 2 or 3 households in one house. And they came out, but they should still qualify for rental assistance.
They would.
Yep.
Owners and renters.
But there's so many unique situations why they may not be eligible for FEMA, but we will do our best if we can't do them to get them into in the state and in the county. I know the city is work on their disaster case management to ensure we find an acceptable solution to get them help.
Recognize that if a household, even if they're not documented in this country, if they have a minor child in that household, they can use that minor child's status to gain eligibility for the entire household. So it's not something, we still don't share our information with ICE. We still don't do that. But I mean, you may have some people that were found ineligible and they just didn't bring in the information of a minor child.
That's great. If there aren't any more questions, we've got one more item. And I just want to thank the representatives from FEMA. It's been great working with you all, and I hope that we can continue that positive working relationship. And I think you have heard, a couple of concerns from council that have been expressed, particularly access and callbacks and those unfortunate hurdles for people getting assistance. So again, thank you for all that you all are doing for our community and for our region. So
thank you.
If I could ask just one more thing.
Sure.
Thank you for the presentation, for waiting so long to give it to us. Can you let us know the best way to get information on when the AB Tech Disaster Recovery Center opens? Will that come to our...
I'm in daily talks with Rachel to let her know the status of it. I can tell you right now, we're waiting for some service contract leasing, which is for our security and our cleaning contracts with it. The building is going to, of course, be provided by AB Tech. We're just waiting for the contracting process on that. And normally that can turn around fairly quickly, but I'm still waiting. As of yesterday, we did not have that approval. But so I'm hoping as soon as I get it, we're going to announce it and everybody will know we're going down there, because we really think that we need a regional facility that can handle the area, not just, county and the central focus that's on a bus route in a central location.
Yeah.
And that's our goal.
Great location. So, and there's still a
Sounds
great
good.
need.
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, if there are not other questions, I'm going to turn it over to our Community Development Division Manager, James Shelton.
Good morning, Council. Can y'all hear me okay? Y'all hear me all right?
Yes.
Thumbs up. Thank you. Go to the next slide. We'll talk about our key takeaways for today is that we are a participating community in this Community Development Block Grant Program, and we get about $1 million every year to address Asheville priorities like affordable housing, infrastructure improvements, and community services. And we target those investments to low to moderate income neighborhoods and to residents. On January 8th, HUD announced that the city of Asheville would receive a direct allocation of CDBG Disaster Recovery funding of $225 million. $195 million of that is for addressing unmet needs around housing, infrastructure, and economic revitalization. And about $29 million of that is for mitigation to be partnered with those housing, infrastructure, and economic revitalization investments that we do. And mitigation means making resilient investments. So building things into our projects that make them more resilient to future events that we might experience. This is a one-time funding opportunity, and the best practice that we've come to learn is to make strategic investments in long-term recovery capital projects. Right now, the city is developing an action plan that identifies what our community's unmet needs are, and it will outline the programs and activities that we will fund, and we'll submit that to HUD by April 21st. That is the timeline that we're on. Next slide, please. Some key things to keep in mind is that we all know the road ahead for recovery is long, and these funds are intended for long-term recovery and resiliency. The action plan that we are drafting right now is a beginning, and it should be reevaluated over time. And HUD actually encourages us to reevaluate it and make amendments to it as many times as necessary for us to be strategic and adjust for new information, new challenges that we're facing, and for any other reason that will require us to adapt. This is particularly important for us as a community because we're still relatively early in our recovery compared to where other communities are when they receive disaster recovery funds. And DR is a part of the recovery, and it has to work in concert with other recovery resources that have come to our community. Next slide, please. So with that, I would like to introduce Stan with Haggerty. Stan comes to us with 32 years of experience working at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. 3 of those years, he was HUD's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Grant Programs, where he directed and oversaw all aspects of the Community Development Block Grant Program, including long-term disaster recovery and the DR program. And he's been actively engaged in interagency efforts to use DR funds to promote long-term recovery from disasters. And we're really grateful to have Stan as a part of our team with Haggerty. Stan, would you please say hello and lead us through the CDBG DR overview?
Sure. Thank you, James, and appreciate the opportunity to make this presentation today or be part of this presentation today. So if we can go on to the next slide. As James noted, the city has been a long-time recipient of annual CDBG funding from HUD. And so there's a fundamental understanding of what the requirements are around the basic CDBG program, but that a disaster recovery funding component goes a bit beyond that to provide communities with long-term recovery funding to address a wide range of needs, particularly unmet needs that crop up as a result of major disasters. And again, HUD only gets this when there is a major disaster declaration, and then HUD does an analysis of data collected from federal partners to figure out who would be eligible for the money and how much they get. Key characteristics here to pay attention to: the disaster recovery funding retains the basic focus of the CDBG program on providing low and moderate income benefit So the city always has to think about designing its overall program to achieve 70% expenditure on activities for the benefit of low and moderate income households and individuals. Beyond that, you develop an action plan as you do for your annual money, but again, it's a bit more involved, bit more extensive with a higher level of public involvement expected in the development of that action plan, given the amounts of money on the table. And whenever you have federal dollars of this nature, there are a number of different cross-cutting requirements that apply. Things like environmental requirements, labor standards or Davis-Bacon wage rates, Uniform Relocation Act would apply, and just a whole host of other laws that need to be considered in implementing these kind of programs. Next slide. So again, James kind of laid out the key fact here. The city got $225 million as a direct grantee from HUD. The corollary here is the state of North Carolina received $1.4 billion in CDBG DR funding for Helene. So this was a pretty quick allocation of funding to a particular disaster. Again, the time frame between late September, the point at which Congress appropriated this money in December, a bit less than 3 months, and then allocated it within about 3 weeks after its appropriation. You're way ahead of the game in this sense, in that in any of a number of instances, communities wait for months, if not over a year, to realize an allocation of these funds. So if we take, for example, the fires in Lahaina out in Hawaii occurred in August of 2023. Their funding came along in this appropriation in December. So the period of time that's transpired between your event, Helene, and the availability of funding is relatively short. There are some numbers to pay attention here. So there's the overall amount. We talked about the 70% for low mod activities. By statute, the city and any other grantee is enabled to take up to 5% of the funds for its administrative cost. And that may look a little high at $11 million, but keep in mind, you are going to run this program for a number of years. HUD puts an administrative timeline around it or a goal of 6 years. Grantees generally can't complete the effort in that 6-year window. And so goes on beyond that, but the key here is to understand you need to pay for your administrative costs over the longer period of time that you may have to run the program. HUD permits grantees to use up to 15% for planning costs, but the reality is nobody really goes anywhere near 15% allocation for that purpose. So you'll decide what's an appropriate level for the city. And again, mitigation overlay here is $29 million to really make those investments that you carry out, be more resilient in the future. Next slide. So 3 things to keep in mind here as you consider how to use this money locally. What you fund needs to tie back to the disaster. The only exception to that would be with respect to some of the mitigation activities, because they can be more forward-looking. And as is the case, whenever you spend CDBG money, 2 key questions you have to ask yourself. What is the eligible activity that we are funding, and how does it meet a national objective? If you can answer those 2 questions, in a positive manner, given the broad constraints of the CDBG program, you're probably able to go forward with your activities. So 3 national objectives you can go for. Again, low and moderate income benefit, elimination of slum and blighting conditions, or addressing imminent threats and urgent needs of the community. And that gets a little bit easier to use in some instances in a disaster response and recovery effort, as opposed to it would be under the regular program. When we think about activities, the appropriation statute calls out 4 areas, calls out housing, infrastructure, economic revitalization, and mitigation. So when we think about things, we'll kind of place them into those 4 buckets, but they provide their a good framing for what can be done. Next slide. So the tie back to the disaster again is, the idea is these monies are intended to address unmet needs for the arising from the disaster. So we can think about that in the context of physical damage to housing and infrastructure, needs of displaced households, and looking at the overall economic environment and whether or not businesses need assistance to recovery and sustain their operations and the jobs that they provide. Again, there are other broader impacts here that may be of a consideration, and those are economic outcomes such as the loss to decline in tourism and impacts on the housing market. In a lot of cases, jurisdictions are already in a housing deficit situation coming into a disaster, and the disaster just makes that worse. So we're very strong focus from HUD standpoint on the housing component. Next slide. So when we think about housing, a couple of approaches here to consider, and that is the repair, rehabilitation, and reconstruction of housing. And again, you can integrate mitigation activities into that to make it more resilient for the future. We can construct new housing if need be. Not generally eligible in the CDBG program per se, but given HUD's ability to bend the rules in a disaster recovery scenario, new construction is a far more viable activity than the regular program. And you can also provide assistance to first-time home buyers to help them with down payments and other costs. Next slide. Restoration of infrastructure. The gentleman from FEMA talked about the fact that public assistance money is going to start flowing in a more substantial way into North Carolina as a result of the damage from Helene. But CDBG funding can also be used to address components of infrastructure that may not necessarily be part of what FEMA would pay for in some instances, or there are new things that you may wish to do. Because again, FEMA is about putting that, under the PA program is about putting things back to prior status and condition. So you think about CDBG DR as filling some gaps on your infrastructure programs. Also, to the extent that you want to build in additional mitigation or resilience or expand what FEMA may be doing, CDBG can be used for that purpose. It can also be used as local match against FEMA projects. So I believe the split right now on public assistance projects will be 90% federal, 10% state local. You can use the CDBG DR money for that match. So again, wide range of activities under the infrastructure umbrella. Next slide. Third item here, again called out by the appropriation language, is economic revitalization. And as in the regular CDBG program, these funds can be used to assist businesses and other for-profit entities to recover. So you can look at providing that assistance in a variety of ways, be it grant, loan, guarantee. You can do job training in support of those businesses as well. Or you can focus on trying to make improvements to commercial districts in order to rebuild them after, based on the damage that they sustain. So again, we're moving through this pretty quickly given the timing today, but we can always have a more in-depth discussion on any of these areas. If we can go on to the next slide. Again, mitigation. Mitigation in and of itself is not an eligible activity category. But what you do is you get mitigation as part of the activities you do carry out. So when you do infrastructure, you add money to it to create a more resilient outcome. Or in the housing, when you rebuild housing or renovate that housing, you may elevate or provide other other protections for that property. So you look at mitigation as part of what, part of the eligible activity you're carrying out. It in and of itself is not an eligible activity, but you build it into the other things that you are doing. So again, needs to be a related cost to the disaster relief effort and long-term recovery. So we're looking for opportunities across the board to integrate the eligible activity and then provide additional mitigation funding to make it better for the future. Next. I think at this point, we'll turn it back to James to go over the planning process the city intends to go through.
Thank you, Stan. So as part of the CDBG DR requirements, we have 90 days from January 21st to submit a action plan to HUD for their approval of how we intend to use these funds. If we could go to the next slide, please. That's April 21st is the timeline that we are under right now. Community engagement is a key part of the development of the action plan. It's also a key part of a 30-day public comment period that happens after we've written the plan and put it out as a draft form. So we're currently in the process right now of writing the plan, and we're also launching and have already begun our community engagement process. There's a second phase of community engagement once the plan is posted for review for 30 days, where we'll have a minimum, HUD requires a minimum of 2 public feedback sessions during that comment period. We intend for that comment period to begin on March 4th. There's a minimum of 2. We intend to hold 3 just to go above and beyond because we're Asheville. If we could go to the next slide. So what goes into this plan? Well, let's put it together. So part of it is our unmet needs analysis, which means what has this storm done to our community in terms of housing, economic, and infrastructure? What other resources have come in to help us address those impacts, and what remains? And that's where DR has a place. There's a huge data analysis portion that goes into this. So looking at those housing impacts, infrastructure, public facilities, economic impacts that our Haggerty team is helping us do. The community engagement process is being led by my team and our communications and public engagement team. But also there's a mitigation needs assessment and a fair housing and civil rights assessment that goes into the action plan as well. Once that unmet needs assessment is done, then we can start thinking about our proposed use of funds. And we have to connect the proposed use of funds directly to an unmet need that Stan was talking about a minute ago, about a direct tie back to the disaster. That's where that comes in. And then we'll make big bucketed allocations toward our housing, economic revitalization, and infrastructure, public facilities, and mitigation. And as Stan mentioned, there's an allocation for planning activities. And just to mention it again, 70% of our investments must benefit low to moderate income individuals or low to moderate income areas. Next slide, please. So this is the process we're in right now. As part of the development of the action plan, we did launch a survey. This was the Asheville Recovery Priorities survey that went out. Was not necessarily a DR specific survey, but we are going to use the information we gather in there to help inform our action plan. So that survey closed on February 2nd, and we're hoping to use that to help us understand our unmet needs in the community, what types of programs and activities we might fund, and what other partners and other stakeholders would like to see implemented. We have public input meetings scheduled throughout this month. They're actually beginning next week. There will be 4 in-person sessions and 2 virtual sessions for residents, businesses, and other partners to listen about what the DR program is and provide their input on unmet needs. We're also fanning out into existing groups like Land of Sky Regional Council and Explore Asheville to engage with those organizations to hear what they have to say about DR. And we also plan to engage City Council at your February 20th agenda briefing to hear about what you have heard from constituents about their needs and ongoing priorities. Next slide. I'm sorry, I'm trying to move quickly I see a few council members have dropped. We anticipate having the draft action plan published for public comment on March 4th, which I think is really great because we're going to March 4th together, right? At that point, we'll have public meetings during that 30-day period from March 4th to April 4th. And we'll respond to public comments. We have to actually respond to the comments in our plan that we get, and we'll post them to our CDBG DR webpage, which should be live next week by the time that we're you guys are at your retreat. We want to bring a full action plan to you, council, on April 8th. Pending your approval of that plan, we will then submit it to HUD for their review and approval. And HUD will have 45 days to review it and approve it. So, you know, April 8th is my birthday, and all I want for my birthday is a CDBG DR action plan to submit to HUD. So this is, we are rallying around this and trying to get this done as inclusive and as engaging as possible with our residents, but also we have a lot of help on hand from Haggerty. It's all hands on deck effort to get us to April 8th. Next slide, please. So just to review key milestones, we had the survey in February. We're going to have these 6 community listening meetings throughout the month of February that are open to anyone, businesses, residents, anybody can come. We hope to engage with you, council, on February 20th, and then be able to post our draft action plan for public comment on the 4th of March. Throughout March, we'll have 3 public feedback sessions, each focusing on housing, economic recovery, and infrastructure, and then hope to bring you a full plan for your approval on April 8th, and then we'll be able to submit that to HUD the day after that. Then HUD will have about they will have 45 days to review and approve it. And we anticipate, once they approve, being able to execute the full grant agreement and begin project implementation later this summer and into the fall. And as Stan mentioned a minute ago, we have 6 years to spend these funds down. We anticipate this being a long-term effort. Next slide, we're going to wrap this thing up. As I mentioned, road ahead for recovery is long. These funds are for long-term recovery. I really want to emphasize this again to you, council, is the action plan that we're drafting right now, and we would ask for your approval on April 8th, is a beginning, and we will amend this. We will come back to you many times with new information as we get new data. As I mentioned, we're still really early in our recovery relative to where other communities are when they receive a DR allocation. So we're still evolving with what our recovery looks like, what our impacts are. So we do anticipate coming before you with amendments to this action plan over time. And I mentioned DR has to work in concert with other recovery resources. Next slide, and we'll wrap this thing up. Here you are. We get money every year. We got a big pot of money this year for disaster recovery, and we got to get an action plan done. Any questions for me or Stan? Thank you very much.
Great job, James. No questions.
Yeah, I just appreciate, I know that this is such a big opportunity for our community. We've never had an infusion of resources like this. And so before we're close to deciding anything, just hearing several times from y'all helps absorb what are the constraints, what are the criteria, et cetera. So I will be reviewing this deck again, I'm sure, to go, right, how is this going to work? So I appreciate that we got it out to the community and ourselves in the earlier side of the process. Thank you.
I'll just echo, very good presentation. That was excellent. A lot of fast talking, which I like a lot.
Mayor, that's all that we had, unless there are any further questions.
Is that it? I mean, it's only 1:36 and there's something else.
I could come up with some questions.
No.
No.
Just
Okay.
kidding.
All right. All
I
right,
gotta go
everybody.
too.
Have a good rest of your day.
All right. Mayor, you need to hang on.
Mayor,
Oh, that's right. That's right. I'm sorry.
No,
Yeah, I'm hanging.
Mayor, I'll catch you on Tuesday. Thank you, though.
Fine. You sure?
Yeah.
Great job, team.
Okay. All right. Bye.